I'd like to welcome everyone to White Sands National Park. It's always really lovely to come out and give these tours and see so many bright and smiling faces. People who came out here because they're curious to learn more about the park and about nature. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for joining me today. My name is Gabrielle, and I work here at White Sands as a park ranger intern, and I will be your guide today. So White Sands National Park is an extremely unique environment. As a lot of you already know, White Sands is home to the largest gypsum dune field in the world. There's 275 square miles of gypsum sand here at this park. Now, there are two other places in the world where there are gypsum sand dunes. However, they do not exceed 2 square miles, and they do not exceed 3 feet in height. So this place really is super unique. And you are kind of walking into another world when you are walking into White Sands. Not only is the sand unique, but the plants and animals here are unique as well. There are over 46 endemic species in the park, which means that there are 46 and counting species of animals that have changed so much to adapt to this crazy environment that they are now considered their own species. Now, while this land might be extremely beautiful to us, it is also extremely harsh. You have to worry about heat and wind and nutrients, meaning that surviving here takes a lot. So today we're going to kind of be exploring what it's like to live in such a harsh and beautiful environment. And what are some of the tricks that these incredible creatures that live in the park use in order to survive. Alright, so I think we are just about to get started, so you all can follow me. Why is the sand here at White Sands so different from other sandy environments we've been to? It's what makes this place really unique. Well, to answer this question, we are going to have to go all the way back to the beginning. How did this place form? What is the sand? What are we looking at? What are we walking in? And what are the plants and animals living with every single day? Well, White Sands has ancient roots. The story of White Sands starts 280 million years ago, before the existence of humans, before the existence of mammals, even before the existence of flowers. Now, during this time, there's a very shallow sea called the Permian Sea that covered much of the state. Now, this sea had the perfect ingredients and the perfect conditions for calcium and sulfur to kind of mingle together and create calcium sulfate, which is also known as gypsum. And this gypsum was deposited on top of the Permian Sea's pre-existing seabed, on top of pre-existing sandstone and even older limestone. And it stayed like that for a very long time. But everything changes in the universe and on Earth, and eventually shifting tectonic plates pushed together and pushed that seabed up and up and up and up, and eventually it became a mountain range. So if you look to the east, you'll see the lovely Sacramentos. It's a little hazy right now, but if you look hard, you can see this light colored band across the mountains. And that's actually the gypsum that was deposited 280 million years ago during the Permian Age. If you look to the west, you will see the sun. You will also see the San Andreas Mountains. If these mountains were not backlit, you would see a very similar banding across them as well. And that is because at some point, these two mountain ranges were part of the same seabed. So why are they so far apart? Well, around 30 million years ago, there was a mighty rift that poured through New Mexico. great. We have the mountains and we have the basin. But the elephant in the room is still, how did all of this sand get here? Well, one fascinating thing about white sands is that the same process that created the sand 10,000 years ago is the same process that creates the sand today. So basically, every summer we have a rainy season here at White Sands. It's called the monsoon season. And gypsum is extremely water soluble. It's one of the reasons why it's so rare in sand form. Because beaches and seas can't really make it. So basically, as the rains come down, it's going to dissolve the gypsum, and together the water and the gypsum will trickle down and collect at the lowest point of the basin. Here it'll fill up with water and create a temporary lake known as Lake Lucero. And you can think of the gypsum at this stage as kind of like a caterpillar in a cocoon, right? It's this dissolved mess, but it's about to transform into something very beautiful. Something that my junior rangers here are going to show everyone. So, you girls can come up. So the gypsum, once the fall comes, the gypsum or the water will evaporate, and the gypsum will reform in this crystal structure. Do you want to show everyone? Just bring that to the front. Now these crystals are extremely, extremely soft. They're softer than your fingernail, meaning that they are absolutely no match for wind and weather and rain. Thank you, girls. That was wonderful. Can we give a hand for our teachers? So because these crystals are so soft, they're no match for wind. So chunks of these crystals will fly off. And when they do, two things will happen. One, they'll collide into other things and get smaller and smaller and smaller. And two, once they collide into other things, they're actually going to get a scratch on their surface. And once the surface is scratched, it's actually going to scatter the light particles, turning them white. So in 10,000 years, 275 square miles of these tiny white crystal particles have built up, creating White Sands National Park as we know it today. Well, that is pretty incredible. Now, the sand here, the soil here is 98% gypsum. And because of this, White Sands is often called a natural or living laboratory. To some of you all, this might seem kind of unfairly bleak or sterile for such a beautiful and dynamic place. But what it really means is that we are walking in a living science experiment. What can live in calcium sulfate? What is living here? How can it live? Additionally, gypsum has very, very unique properties. As we've already experienced, it's soft and it's water soluble. These unique properties that gypsum has actually exposes a lot of parts of nature that we can't normally see. And that's another thing we're going to explore later on this tour. Now, at this point, some of you all might be wondering, gee, if wind and weather can break off pieces of crystal, what is keeping the sand here at all? How come the sand doesn't just blow away into the atmosphere? Well, that will actually be the topic of our next stop. So I will take you all there. Now, before we go on to our next stop, there's one important thing I have to mention, which is we're about to be crossing into this interdunal area. Now, we're going to be talking about interdunal areas a little bit later, but they are very sensitive spots of the park. They depend on a soil crust that is very fragile. If you step on the soil crust, it will take a very long time for those microorganisms to regenerate. So as we walk through this interdunal area, we're going to walk single-filedly. That way we can minimize that damage that we're going to be doing to a very tiny path. right, that's enough chatting. So I would love it if a few brave souls would kind of shout out into the ether a couple things they found surprising about White Sands.
Water underneath.
Oh, wow. The water underneath. How cold it is.
How big is it?
How big it is.
How white.
How white it is. It is very white. Sometimes I go on Google reviews and people will leave a 1-star review saying, it's not white, it's eggshell. And I'm like,
So you follow the Instagram subpar park?
yes. Was anyone surprised by the amount of vegetation here?
Yes.
Me too. Was anyone surprised by how firm the dunes were when they were walking on it?
Oh, yes.
Well, firmer than beach sand, most beach sand. Well, most of the reasons that we just named is actually because of one thing. It's from an event that occurred 3 million years ago. Now, during this time, the Rio Grande River actually flowed through the southern edge of the basin, and it did a lot of damage. It brought up a lot of mud and sediment, and it eventually closed the basin. Now, one outcome of that was Lake Lucero, what we talked about before, and the other outcome we're going to discover right now as we all dig into the sand. Now, as you dig into the sand, you're going to notice a couple things. The first thing you're going to notice is that as you dig down, the sands feel really sticky or humid. The dunes are actually at 99% humidity year-round. How can that be? Now, as you continue to dig, after 2 or 3 inches, it gets very, very, very hard to dig. So what causes this? Well, as someone said earlier, there is a ton of water underground. So just 2 to 3 feet underneath the surface of these interdunal areas is a perched aquifer. Now, this stick is representing that. This is a 5-foot stick.
Wait, so if you were like dying of thirst out here?
The question was, if you're dying of thirst, could you dig down and drink the water? And the answer to that is no. The answer, yeah. The water here is very salty. It's alkaline. Now, the water here is actually the secret to why anything here exists at all. The plants, the animals, and even the dunes themselves. Now, remember at last stop, I told you all that gypsum is extremely water soluble. So when it mixes with water, it's actually going to harden, and that's what we were feeling when we were digging down. It's going to turn into this plaster-like paste, and then semi-cement the dunes, keeping them there like glue. Now, this property that gypsum has is actually used in many household products as binding agent. It's used in toothpaste, it's used in drywall, it's used in alcoholic beverages like wine and beer. It's actually estimated that you will eat around 25 pounds of gypsum throughout your lifetime.
Eat about a pound a day.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe if you went to a state school, you would consume a little bit more. Now, this water pretty much stays underground. There's no sitting water out here. So if you're a plant or an animal, how would you get your water? Well, if you're a plant, you can reach your roots down and bring that water up and store it in your body. If you're an animal, you have to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more efficient. So small animals like lizards and small rodents, they'll get most of the water that they consume by eating plants. Sometimes they'll find little drops of, dew or rain, and they can get by with that. If you're a predator in the dunes, like a kit fox, you will get all the water you need from eating the blood of your prey. So the water here is important, but it's also important that these creatures have other things that are filtering the water for them, the plants here. Now, as we kind of discovered the water by digging into the sand, there's many other things of this park that is revealed by the properties of gypsum itself. And one of those things we're going to explore in a minute at our next stop. Well, the way that these are formed is actually, we'll take this plant as an example. This is a skunk bush sumac. It's not the only plant that makes these pedestals, but it is a common one. So when the skunk bush sumac is a tiny little baby, its adaptation that allows it to live here is that it can grow really fast and really strong. So it'll land somewhere in the dunes, and then as it's kind of growing, it can reach its roots, somehow penetrating that really hard ground, and reach all the way down to the water table. Now, once its roots are down at the water table, it's going to bring that water up, and as we all know at this point, when water mixes with gypsum, it turns into that plaster-like paste. So the gypsum around those roots are actually going to kind of slightly dissolve and cement around. Now, when the wind comes, it's going to blow that dune away and reveal this structure. Now, plants have to worry about a lot of things in the dunes. They have to worry about soil nutrients. They have to worry about getting fresh water. They also have to worry about the wind. So the dunes at this point of the park can move anywhere from 18 to 20 feet a year, meaning that you have to have tricks up your sleeve in order to live. Now, this pedestal is advantageous for plants like the skunk bush sumac because one, he has a permanent home. The wind isn't going to just be blowing the sand out from underneath him. He has it for himself. And the second reason why it's advantageous is that he's much higher up than everything else in the area. So if another dune comes along, he'll have less of a chance of getting swallowed within his lifetime. Now, what I really, really love about these pedestals and what it really exposes is how much plants move and how much plants grow. So we can see how big the roots are of this plant and how much this plant is moving. Now, I don't know about you all, but I'm certainly guilty of this. A lot of times when I'm hiking throughout the woods, I see plants as these half-living things. Intellectually, of course, I know plants are alive. But they don't have a lot of the traits that we associate with life. They don't chirp or bark or talk. They are very, very quiet. They also don't jump or fly or run. They are very, very still. At least they seem that way to us. The plants are very, very much alive, and because they are alive, they have the ability to not only perceive the outside world through senses, but also to respond to what they are perceiving. So all the plants here that we see right now are constantly perceiving light and water and air in the present moment. Now, this plant right over here is known as a cottonwood tree. A lot of you all might be surprised to see cottonwoods out here, and that is because they are water-loving plants. They're usually found in creeks and rivers. They can guzzle up anywhere from 50 to 200 gallons of water a day. So how can they live in an area that has less than 10 inches of water a year? Well, these guys are actually moving a lot. So their adaptation that allows them to live here in the sands is that they can, again, reach their roots down to the water table. If they guzzle up a lot of that water, they can actually spread their roots out laterally, sideways. And then, if they find more water somewhere, they can actually create a new shoot. And so they can grow another trunk. So if you see a lot of cottonwoods in a line, then that's what they're doing. They're moving throughout the dunes to find that water. And they're actually one plant that is just moving through. Now, this is pretty crazy, but cottonwoods aren't the only trees that do this. If you've been to an aspen forest, aspens also create new shoots and travel throughout the forest that way. Now, these pedestals are also very, very important for animals at White Sands. So animals, like the kit fox, will actually make their dens in these pedestals. It gets very, very, very hot during the summer months here. It can reach 113 degrees, meaning that if you're an animal, you have to figure out a place to hide, or else you're going to get heat stroke or something. So kit foxes will build their homes in these. These are like the high rises, the New York penthouses of the dunes. Now, the kit foxes will make their homes here and then hunt in these interdunal areas. Once they're done hunting, they'll kind of move along and they'll leave these dens for other people or for other animals to enjoy. So animals that can't always build dens, like rodents and lizards, will kind of move in and enjoy the den after it is left there. So researchers have actually found multiple little animals sharing one den. They have found a cowless lizard, a whiptail lizard, an Apache pocket mouse, and a pocket gopher, all huddled together, sharing one den from a pedestal. Now, keep in mind that these plants, just because they're alone, they are very, very much dependent on other things in the dunes. They still depend on microorganisms, mycorrhizal fungi, lichen, for their survival. There's nothing here that is truly separate or by itself here in the dunes. Is this plant alive? And no, this plant is dead. So we have been staring at a dead corpse for a little bit. No, I think that is a sumac. Okay, I take it back, guys. This plant is not dead. I thought this plant was dead for a really long time, but it has been discovered that there are new shoots coming out. So yay, this plant's alive. So on the way over here, I asked you all to kind of reflect on something that you felt like you couldn't live without. And the reason why I did this is because this plant cannot live without its animal counterpart. And that animal counterpart cannot live without this plant. They are co-equal. They are completely dependent on each other. Now, this plant is called the soap tree yucca, and the animal that I'll be talking about today is called the yucca moth. And their story goes like this. So every spring, the soap tree yucca gets beautiful green stalks with cream-colored bell-shaped flowers that come out the side. Now, when these flowers blossom, the cocoon, the moth will emerge from its underground cocoon at the exact same time, and it will mate on the flowers. Now, once the moths are done mating, the female moth will crawl into the flower and collect some pollen that she will place and hold it underneath her chin. She will then fly away to an empty flower ovary to lay her eggs. Now, once she lays her eggs, somehow she knows that if she crawls into that plant, into the stigma of that plant, places that pollen that she was holding from underneath her chin onto the stigma of the plant, then these pods will show up. Now, these pods are the fruit of the soap tree yucca. So what the moth is doing is pollinating the flowers. Now, these pods are extremely helpful for her babies because they're like a hard home, like a skeleton. They protect the babies from predators and wind and weather, and they also feed the babies. Alright, there we go. So if you look at one of these seeds, they're little black seeds, and sometimes you'll see holes in them. And that's from the larvae of the yucca moth caterpillar. So once the larvae are plump and fat and ready to bury themselves underground, they'll fall off from these pods, hopefully not impale themselves on the yucca spines, and then dig themselves underneath to bury a cocoon. Now, this story is pretty incredible to me personally, and the reason why is because it always makes me think, where does the moth end and where does the yucca start? Where does this kind of separation end and start? Now, to some of you all, this may seem like a really silly question because the moth is the moth and the plant is the plant, and that's it. But remember that we too are filled with organisms, with creatures that are separate from ourselves. For example, the mitochondria that is in our cells are completely separate. They kind of move around freely, reproduce freely from anything else in the cell, and create their own DNA. But without the mitochondria in our cells, we couldn't function. We couldn't walk, we couldn't play with our kids, we couldn't think. Similarly, in plants, chlorophyll is completely independent. And again, chlorophyll is what is needed for plants to make energy. So what really is separate and what is together? I don't know. Similarly, if you look out over here, we will see those lovely interdunal areas. Now, interdunal areas are very, very important here at White Sands because it's where most of the life and plants can live. And the reason why plants and life can live in these interdunal areas is because there's a really, really strong community of organisms there. The way life moves into these interdunal areas is like a big domino chain. First, it starts with the microorganisms that make up the soil crust. The soil crust makes nutrients available for plants. It also holds the dirt down. It's like a big net. So the plants are then protected by the wind. Then the grasses will show up there. They've adapted to soil crust so they can kind of break through. And they also require a little bit less nutrients than the plants that move in after them. So after the grasses move in, then the shrubs can move in because the grasses provide additional nutrients to the soil. And once the shrubs move in, shrubs like hoary rosemary and mint, and rubber rabbit brush, and four-winged saltbush, then animals, mammals, reptiles can move in, and then the kid foxes come and hunt, and it's kind of this little oasis in the dunes. So once again, we have this kind of example of interdependence. author and park ranger favorite, Edward Abbey. And he says, anything that lives where it would seem that nothing could live, enduring extremes of heat and cold, sunlight and storm, parching aridity and sudden cloud bursts, among burnt rocks and shifting sands, any such creature, beast, bird, or flower testifies to the grandeur and heroism inherent in all forms of life, including the human, even in us. So when you go home and you kind of think about why national parks are important to you, or why state parks are important to you, or public lands are important to you, remember that it's not just you who enjoys these parks, but everything here that lives in them. So this concludes the tour, so I would like to thank you all for coming out and joining me.